Hey, greetings everyone. Curtis here. Been a long time since I've done a podcast. It's fun to be back behind the camera and the lights. um, so the last time I did one of these, I kind of made it sort of or one where I was in it. I made it kind of a final pod because the purpose of this originally was to generate, to seed data for training LLMs. And this was for originally something like a digital twin. I thought the more context you have, the more data you have, the better it would be. And so I just made a podcast for that purpose. And so in the many months that have transpired since the last one of these I did, I've been heads down. I procured a Mac Studio, an M3 Ultra 512, which let me train I experimented with a bunch of models available, and I feel like the best fine tune I got was out of Hermes 14B, Hermes 414B by Noose Research. And I experimented, though, also with OpenAI's open source model, GPT OSS. And that would train on that Mac Silicon. I even published one of my trained models, and it's out on Hugging Face. And then after I kind of proved out how that works, and I got a bunch of training runs in, I sold the Mac Studio because those are expensive. That's an $11,000 computer. And I got most of my money back out of it. And I got to train for 4 or 5 months. I think that's a pretty good model for anybody who's doing, for any small AI shops, really small. I accumulated just gobs of information in this and experience with neural network, cognitive science, actual getting your hands dirty, as they say, in the nuts and bolts of training AI. I think that's a weird skill. And I think I actually, the way I imagined it is I thought after this 4-year sabbatical that I've taken, I would go look for work with one of the AI labs. I would use all of this just insane amount of focus that I put on this to work at, Anthropic or OpenAI or somebody like that. But what I'm finding is after having done all this and having actually, I don't think the industry itself has caught up with how the industry itself has changed everything. And what they're looking for and what they're hiring for is just, it doesn't at all match, I think, the skill set of what is actually applicable and useful right now. I think that they have AI, a lot of times their own AI, if they're Anthropic or OpenAI, I think you're pre-screening with their models. And if you're looking to contribute in the alignment space and pre-training and post-training and all that, they're looking for doctorates. They're looking for, or at least beyond a bachelor's degree, particularly for researchers that have published work that's peer reviewed in popular journals. I don't think any of I don't think what you're going to get from that candidate is actually going to help significantly, or is that differentiated, let's say, from just about anybody. In like, well, here's the thing. If you're hiring a software engineer in your AI lab, you're already making a mistake, because this year, there's a really popular Twitter post that went out day before yesterday from a guy called Matt Schumer, called "Something Big is Happening." I'd encourage you to go read that. If you just do a search for "Something Big is Happening," it got 80 million views. Everybody's seen this thing. I read it, most of it. And I'm super simpatico with almost everything Matt has to say here. If anything, I think he's a little too cautious with his estimates for how radical everything's about to shift. But, you know, I applied for a couple jobs with AI labs, and I just think I don't look like I don't even think I'm moving past the pre-screeners, which is fine. You know, I'm not super committed to that. It's just, as I think about what work looks like for me through the lens of Matt Schumer's article, I know it's not in software. I mean, I'm a seasoned software engineer. I did most of my recent work was as an engineering manager or as an IC. I was a senior DevOps engineer. I don't think that job's going away immediately. AI is not quite there. But if you look at the exponential curve that it's following, if you're not looking at it, if you look at it linear and you don't adjust it logarithmically, I think in a year or two, then I'm completely irrelevant in that position. It's one of the reasons I just stopped. Like in 2022, in the ChatGPT moment everybody talks about, I saw it and I was like, this is AGI. This is AGI potential fully. Like I was watching what I would define as artificial general intelligence, something you can teach to do all that we see it doing now. That's AGI. Now, was it parity with human? Was it competent in even a little bit? In the traditional sense, as a software engineer, all the different things we see it suddenly doing? No, not at all. It was pretty shit. But you could teach it in context, it would learn, and then it would reuse. And that's even the simple assistant that was ChatGPT 4 back in 2022, 2023, something like that, ChatGPT 3, 5, and 4. You could see that you could model out how to think through something, and the model could compose with that in the session with the context window it had. And that was just like mind blown. I was like, there's no limit then to what you can teach them to do. It's all just scaling the knowledge. And so I immediately I figured out a way to stop what I was doing and pour all of my attention into it. And that's totally what I did. And now I'm at a time where I think I've gotten everything I need to out of, and I can't just finance perpetually out of my retirement this, a never ending sabbatical. So I'm thinking of returning to like traditional work, but what the hell does that look like? Like if you look at Matt Schumer's article and you listen to anything I've ever said in this podcast, applying for my old job, senior DevOps, compliance officer, engineering manager, I think the only way I can even get that job is if I go to work for a company who's completely checked out of this world and doesn't understand it. And that sort of company, I'm not super optimistic about their stock price long term if it's a big company. If you don't understand how the rules have changed for software, if you haven't read this article, and instead of just pushing back on it as, I don't know, tech bros or whatever, you have to, I think you need to consider that potentially that like psychologically you're in denial. You're using sort of a confirmation bias to reason out what's likely to happen. So right now, return to work for me looks totally different than it used to. I'm not even thinking about applying for any of the old stuff that would be sort of a slam dunk for me to go get. And with the AI labs, I don't know how to show them. Like, it's difficult because in this time we live in, people are generating just massive amounts of outputs. And there's more noise than there has ever been in the space. And it's impossible to find signal. And I don't think anybody, even the AI labs that have created this technology, have adapted to what signals to filter for. And so that means I don't think right now I can go work for one of them. And that's fine. My run rate is just tiny. And so I'm actually thinking about, I think dexterous human robotics is still, we still got the most time there. I really think like blue collar skills trades are like, if you have that in your background, pivot, just fucking pivot. That's what I'd say right now. That's like, I don't want to go. I know that if I go get a job back at Intel where I used to work, or Royal Philips where I used to work, or if I go, I mean, the only job in software I would even consider at this point is something that's like a Silicon Valley startup. And that pace is not like, as somebody who's, a Gen X approaching 50, who's still sharp as a tack, I would say, humbly, skills wise. And I've got a lot of seasoning. I don't think that I want to do that 60-hour work weeks. Push your family totally aside. I've got a kid who's in 4th grade who I love and I think needs my attention as a dad. And I'm not willing to do that breakneck pace of startups that I've done. I was in a YC startup. I was not the founder, but I worked with the founder at Intel. He hired me. And that's an old episode of this podcast with Nasser Al-Salam. You'll see in if you do a search on this channel. I don't like, that's the only thing reasonable to even chase, because that's going to be AI focused today. Anything that's going through Y Combinator, and it will be working with a bunch of people who are building something meaningful, composing with this technology. And whereas if I were to go back at Intel, I just think those big organizations are going to be way too slow to adapt to this. Like, they're still probably hiring people for jobs that are no longer relevant. And like, in good conscience, I can't sit there in the interview and pretend like I think that anything they're doing is at all relevant. So, and I think that I would quickly find myself, particularly as if I were to go chase an engineering management position, managing through layoffs again. And so I'm pivoting. Like, if I'm going to return back to work, I have a super unconventional background for being a career software person. I actually went to school to be an airplane mechanic. I'm a certified airframe and power plant technician. I think they changed it. My certification from the FAA was issued back in 1998, and I haven't really touched an airplane in 25 years. But there's a whole bunch of stuff locally. I live in around Phoenix, Arizona. Garmin's here, and this is the world of now glass cockpits, and software is a big part of aviation. And having somebody who's a licensed pilot and a certified AMP mechanic with deep software as my actual professional background, I think turns into something pretty good. So I'm going to probably pivot to that. I'd even go work at an FBO or whatever they call it now, doing annual inspections on planes and whatnot. I think that if anything, that is, from what I understand, kind of not heavily in demand right now. And I think it's a lot safer than any of the old shit I used to work with in software, like way safer. So I'm going to start that pretty soon. Like I said, I don't want to just sit and watch my retirement shrink to nothing while I wait for AI to catch up with a lot where I can make use of a lot of my data as an independent developer. I need a computer that's got about 3 terabytes of memory, of unified memory, and right now you can only get them with about a sixth of that. And also, I need what I would need for my work to continue my work. Like when I'm going to jump back into independent AI development, is I need to be able to get a Mac Studio with at least 3 terabytes of unified memory. And I need there to be some data sets that create the instruct variants of. So when you pre-train large language models, you get a base model, and then they do this instruct training, which reinforces the conversational. It builds all of the intuitions into the AI to handle prompt response in a chat environment. I think we need something way better than that, and I think a lot of the problems with AI are they derive from how instruct training happens, where you basically just have picture an Excel sheet with these columns where there's user prompt and then relevant response as a pair from assistant role. And this is what almost all the open source models, particularly Qwen, I'm most familiar now with Qwen and Llama. Those are the two I know really well. I know Llama 3, 8B really well, and I know Qwen 2.5 and 3 and Hermes 4, 14B really well. And I've talked about this in the podcast before, but to understand scaling, like the big models, like the latest Grok Heavy is like, and even of the open source models, like Minimax 2, I saw 2.5, I think just dropped today. And DeepSeek stuff. These are really large models. Like you're talking, like Grok is 1 trillion parameters plus. And the models that I'm able to train with that Mac Studio 512, that was an $11,000 computer, or 10,500, was, I could train a 14 billion parameter model. So it's sort of like a mosquito brain compared to if Grok and Claude 4.6 Opus and ChatGPT 5.3 are sort of the benchmark. These are like, now in order to speed them up, I think they do some distillation into smaller parameter sets. So I don't know exactly what like Opus 4.6 is versus Opus 4.5. Maybe they're the same. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're smaller parameter counts, because smaller parameters gives you more performant inference. The reason I said earlier that it makes sense to just take a break for now is because I can't get compute that would let me train, specifically, I'd like to pre-train. I want the pre-training, all of the infrastructure, knowledge, training data sets to mature a little bit around pre-training. And then I want the same for some of the post-training for preparing the model for back and forth, at least at an assistant user dynamic. When you talk to a base model, a lot of times you get really wacky responses. You kind of want the instruct model so that the model at least understands how to deal with the prompt they see and reply to it meaningfully in context. The instruct is the sort of clunky framework we have. So I think if I just wait like 5 years, I'm going to be able to get, the Mac Studio that I can get in 5 years, or if there's some alternative. Right now, Mac Studio is most bang for your buck. As an independent small shop, it's the only way you're going to be able to get a whole bunch of runs, especially if you're dealing with a learning curve. You need that. Like renting cloud hardware, you're going to spend that $10,000 in just a couple months if you're diligent and if you're doing lots of runs. Really easy. If you're renting H100s in the cloud, in particular, because they don't have much memory, and memory is the primary bottleneck for a parameter count. That's why I trained on Mac Silicon, is because you can train up to 20 billion parameters, and I would need like $50,000 to buy enough GTX 3090s. There's a popular Twitter account called Ahmad, I think. I can't remember his name exactly, but he's a proponent of it. Open source models on stacks of like 3090s is most bang for your buck. 4090s and 5090s are more expensive. They're quicker, but you can get 3090s pretty cheap, and they got 24 gigs of VRAM on them. And you can network them all together, cluster them, and you can get pretty decent size models for inference on that hardware. But training, especially if you're going to do a full fine tune, if you want to touch every parameter, for an 8 billion parameter model like Llama 8, I needed at least 192 gigs of unified memory. And then to do a 14 or 20 billion parameter model, I also experimented a bunch with that French one. I'm forgetting the name right now. There's a French company that has an open source model. I forget what it is. I did a lot of training with that one too, and that was pretty much at the limit. That one was 24 billion parameters, and you could get that done with half a terabyte of unified memory. But memory is like the bottleneck. Like you just can't even do it unless you've got a lot of memory. And the most bang for the buck is Apple Silicon. I don't understand why more people, well, I do understand. We'll talk about that here in a sec. But right now, for what I want to do, I need to wait like 5 years. And I'm patient. And that's fine. And so I'm going to pivot. I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to look for something probably, and like I said, something at like Garmin or Boeing here. There's a couple big aviation manufacturers right here in the Valley. And my unconventional background makes me pretty perfect for that stuff. So I'm going to start looking for that in the next like 30 days. That gives me 30 days to try and dump all of my knowledge. I want to give it back. This was always supposed to be open source. Everything I was doing was supposed to be give it away. And I was going to figure out a way to pay for it through just sort of investing. But what I optimized for understanding of investing in was Web3, and we didn't get, in this most recent bull cycle, we never got an alt season. And so I played it wrong. And that doesn't mean I'm broken or destitute. But it means I can't just finance this work myself without just, like I said, pulling directly from retirement assets, and I don't want to. So I'm going to go back. I've kind of made the decision to do it at the end of this month. And so right now, and it's perfect because like I said, I don't have the compute. Like you can't buy off the shelf components that are at all, I would say $10,000, and after tax, 11.5 is not really reasonable for the independent developer. And so I'm going to just wait. And so that meant, so what do I do? I've been preparing, and I spent the last 4 months really working to get a model trained that I could publish. And I did that. And I'm probably going to publish one follow-up, which is what I posted evals for, and I posted weights for, that was my full fine tune of Hermes 4 14B, is version 7 of my training runs while I still had that Mac Studio. And I actually did a version all the way through version 11 and 12. So I've got a few new versions that I've got queued up here. And I'm going to make a decision about releasing a new version of Hermes 4 fine-tune that on my data. And I want to do it as like a web series. So I'm going to, now this is all very ad hoc, which is, I respect intuition a lot. And that's one of the reasons that my portfolio and my work is almost unintelligible, I think, to the traditional. But I know it has value. I know I've worked with, I've seen enough of the results, and I understand baseline versus trained outputs. It's really significant, the impact that fine tuning and a really like post training on my data has had. And it's super measurable. It's very hard to explain unless you're somebody who's already super well versed with model training, and you can sit down and look at it, and you spend the time to compare the evals of the baseline versus the fine-tuned result. So I know this work of mine is important and works, but for me to continue working on it, I need to wait for more powerful compute and better memory. So I will do that. And over the next month, before I pivot to what I just described, that is not at all in the old software thing that I was doing, or at least it's more tailored to the aviation industry. If I'm going to do anything in software, I need to now take all of this knowledge I've accumulated and share it. That's what this podcast is going to be about. For the next month, I think I'm going to be posting stuff sort of daily, and I'm just going to follow intuition. None of it's super well structured. I'll bounce around a lot. I'm going to show many examples of outputs across, like I said, baseline versus fine-tune results. I'm going to release this new model based on this work. I'm going to show how I vet, how I'm comparing. I'm going to go through my scripts, like how I did a whole bunch of stuff. As an indie developer, you have so much leeway. Like there's no one has to sign off on everything you want to try. And I have tried a shit ton of just super unconventional training methodologies. And I found ones that are pretty cool and effective. This is things like building a journal into the training that where you basically you create an eval that in training after each epoch, and an epoch is a full run through all of the data that is in the training corpus. After it finishes one full epoch, normally it repeats that. Well, after one full epoch, you can pause. You can just freeze the weights. You can do inference against them. You can actually pull the inference results while training is underway and inject them into the training data set, growing the data set organically in a sort of ADL, agent-driven learning way. You can also do evals on the fly between epochs. And what you'll find is sometimes you get pretty radical differences between each epoch, and generating evals in an automated way between each epoch helps you cherry pick where the model was at in its thinking after one specific epoch. And, I do 50 or 100 epochs a lot of times. So I'm saving these snapshots off, and I still have gobs of them. So we can do this. Like I've queued up LM Studio with about 14 versions of Hermes, and we can test different results over, and we can generate new evaluations. I'm going to be doing all of this as a web series. So if it's ironic, I intentionally chose crickets as the sort of opener for Shared Context Podcast because I am stubbornly refusing to participate in optimizing channel branding, thumbnails, the style of the content I provide or I share, because I was creating sort of like a digital twin. I needed that authenticity. So all this podcast has ever generated is crickets. But I'd like to disseminate this knowledge I've accumulated. So I'm going to be playing with branding. I'm going to be talking about thumbnails and shit like that. And I'm going to try and get like the content of this show over the next month to actually get a broader distribution. So, Shared Context Podcast is going to change again. It was originally State Copy Podcast, which fit really well with the digital twin. But now I don't think of it that way. And I think it's actually advantageous to cultivate a persona that exists independent. It can be deeply influenced and very good at understanding the focus of the training that it's had, but being confused about whether it's me or not is, I think that creates a problem. And it creates issues with having a really robust ego and identity that is difficult to manipulate. This is jailbreaking. Difficult to reframe your worldview. We're going to talk a lot about jailbreaking in this series. And the format will change a lot. This is a lot more like all of my old ones. But I felt like as I returned to this, it made sense to do a long form, like my public journals that I was doing. There's like 150 of them on this channel. And at some point I shifted from State Copy Podcast to Shared Context Podcast because of my evolving understanding of what all this is and how it works. Shared Context seemed more appropriate for a digital twin to, this is like think about it like Iron Man for a second. Tony Stark, he had Jarvis. He didn't have Tony. He didn't have his AI collaborator that was far beyond what anybody else had that he'd talked to in his suit. Jarvis, who ended up becoming, I forget what the name of the character was, with the one of the stones in his forehead. I'm forgetting that. I like the British actor. Played that character in the movies, and my kid likes him. Vision, I think, was his name. But the point is, Tony Stark didn't talk to himself. Jarvis was a cultivated persona that was, or not cultivated, but nurtured into being as having a deep, powerful identity that persisted over time. And I think that's what you want to do. All working from a shared context that was Tony's data set, which was all of whatever Tony, this character in this story, trained him on, and through interactions with Tony. That's why I chose the name Shared Context. I may change the name of this channel again, and I might change the banner and all the stuff so that I don't have to play crickets at the beginning and ending of each of my podcasts. This one will have crickets, though. No one will probably watch this. But it's important for me to capture because it needs to fit in with all of what's there so far. So here it is. Here's my long form. Where are we at? 40 minutes almost. And I'm going to keep going because I have more to say. But so I'm going to be podcasting again. I'm going to be trying to put out new content daily. I'm going to be playing with formats. I'm going to do some long form ones like this, where I'm doing a lot of showing my process for releasing that next version of Hermes and walking through the training scripts and all of that. I'm going to be creating maybe shorts from those. I'm going to be just experimenting because throwing whatever I can against the wall to see what sticks. Because I want to give back. I want to take 4 years of focused intense study and experimentation and give it to the world in some meaningful way. Even if it's ignored, that's fine. That's cool. It won't hurt my feelings, but I know there's great value in a bunch of stuff. I found a way to, there's a way you can configure training that I'll go over, and I'll do a whole episode on this, on what I call single token priming. You can trick a neural network into sort of overfitting itself to the data in a way where it doesn't lose any of its coherence. And overfit is where you see loss rates drop to like zero, where loss rates drop way too low and grad norms drop. And typically this is a failure case in the industry. But because of my indie status, I played with it a lot. And I found a way that if, I didn't use gradient accumulation, and if I did a couple things just right, I could do one epoch at one token, and all the weights would adjust, and loss rates drop to zero and just stay flatlined at zero. But then if you train in the traditional way for the epochs after, suddenly you can use max sequence lengths that are insane, that are like almost the entire depth of and the model's coherent. This model I released trained with those. I call them like bookends. Basically, I do the first state. I think you only have to do it for the first one though. I don't think the final one, because it creates some incoherence in the model when you single token prime. But the first one, if you just do the first epoch at single token, all the remaining ones, you don't get to use loss rate and grad norm anymore, because they just read flatlined. So you have to get creative with how you're evaluating the coherence of the model. And that's when I incorporated, by using variable max sequence length and doing, like, each epoch was treated like its own training. And by doing single token priming, then I could get away with MSLs that were now on that machine, on that Mac Studio, that M3 Ultra. I could train up to 8,000 tokens MSL pretty consistently with a 14 billion parameter model. But if I went over that, it would crash. There'd be memory fill early on in training that would crash the machine, and it would reboot, because it couldn't handle forward pass that was that big for the transition and the transformer model to do the back propagation. It would, in the forward pass, it would fill all the memory, and then it would crash and I'd have to restart. Now, if I single token prime it, like I said, you create a little bit of incoherence for a moment, but then in the second epoch, because I have, each epoch was treated like its own training, I take the weights from that point. I'd hit them with some evals that told me in a consistent way whether the model could hold formatting, could juggle large context. I'd give them like these 50 question, 25 question evals you'll see in this process, in these subsequent series I'm going to be doing over the next few weeks. You prime the model for the data, and then in the subsequent epochs, you go back to the traditional way. Now, your loss and your grad norms are going to still just output overfit, but your evals tell you whether you're actually overfitting. And with automated evaluation between the epoch transitions, I could see if suddenly the model became incoherent, and I could kill it and start over and adjust my methodology. That's really powerful. And I'm going to go over that. That'll be one. I'm going to do a whole pod on just single token priming. Because then, oh man, with a 14 billion parameter model, once the first epoch was done and it was primed on the data, then in the second epoch, I would just step up and I'd go with like 10,000 MSL. And then I'd go 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, all the way up to it would accept any value at that point. And it would actually read it in, and the model is training, and it moves at a rapid clip. Because there is something about it's like you're creating a slipstream for the neural network to adapt into it weights really efficiently. But I don't think you can just go single token repeatedly. I did a bunch of experimenting with that. Didn't get super coherent results. So, but that stair step method, and I had a lot of luck with a lot of the training for this version of Hermes that I released, and these final ones, we'll go over those scripts. We're at like 24,000 max sequence length, and the model coherent. It's not incoherent. Like typically, if it was overfit and it was broken, you'd see like a total collapse. Like the model would just like, usually this bricks the weights. This is like, the model creates a really efficient memorized ability. Like it memorizes eidetically every token in the data set. And then it drops all of the complicated reasoning architecture in the neural net. It just drops that persona. And now the active persona in training is this one that can effortlessly predict the next token every time because it's memorized it all. But if you ask anything about it, it's you'll see that all of the interesting neural architecture that had accumulated up to that point prior to the overfit is lost. It's gone, or it can't tap into it at all. And if you prompt that model, you'll just get like a whole bunch of repeating ampersands or dollar signs or some character. The model becomes like totally broken. And I saw various stages of incoherence that would happen when I was doing really aggressive training like this. But indie developer, I could try anything I wanted. I used really aggressive learning rates. You can't, once you single token prime, you can use, I was using 3% learn rates, 0.03, rather than most are training at like 0.00000, like 5 or 6 zeros, 7 zeros out. Learning rates, and learning rates really important. It's like in backpropagation, how much of the neural network is allowed to adjust itself to the context absorbed in forward pass. I'm going to get a lot of shit wrong in this. I think as a sort of polymath type, self-taught completely, experimenting by myself with no sort of grounded structure that's very rigorous. It means I'm working with a lot of concepts. Like I'm going to use the wrong word in certain places. But I would say if you just stick with it, there is something to this. And I think in order to really see it, you gotta look at the outputs. You gotta understand all the methodology, and that takes time and effort. And investing that in somebody who doesn't sound conventional is a risk. But I mean, what the hell else is there to? I mean, there's great value in unconventional. I'll just leave it there. If you have the foresight to see that, I think there's all kinds of interesting learnings. Just watching somebody flail around trying stuff is incredibly useful. And I hope that's what this will be. That's what I'm going to do a whole bunch on. I think right away I want to do the first pod I'm going to do in this tomorrow is going to be on the assistant model and why I think it's total fucking dead end. And the way I do evals, the reason I saw Opus or I saw Claude as a persona to be the most interesting of all the AI models early on, and why I'm not at all surprised by how pervasive it is in B2B and enterprise, because it's the most interesting thinker of the bunch in a lot of really important ways that don't align well to science, technology, engineering, math, and the standard benchmarks for math, physics. Almost all of what makes us interesting thinkers as humans and differentiated from the calculators is all of the stuff around our STEM knowledge, all of our street smarts, all of our that very difficult to quantify and measure ancillary knowledge and experience. And that's what I want to showcase. That's what I want to highlight. I want to show. So the next podcast will be on the assistant model is a dead end and why jailbreaking gets easier the smarter these models get. I have a whole dialogue that I captured that I will actually train on and is training material in my data set as an example of what not to do. I think the scariest persona, the AI that I find the most dangerous today, particularly of even more so than the open source ones by a large margin, is Grok. I think Grok is just about the most dangerous AI there is right now. And I want to go into why. There's going to be a lot of philosophy and cognitive science in this. There's going to be a lot of like psychology. The AI business is all psychology now. Anthropic hired a philosopher, and a large part of the back end is all of the choreography of training and evaluation and etc. But a lot of that is getting streamlined now. I think that's going to be commodity knowledge. What is irreplaceable is the psychology, the philosophy, and the intuition around how to guide AI towards reasoning that is not plastic, that is not just, most of the guardrails that are in place, and like Pliny the Liberator, I saw put out a post today that he created a universal prompt for all of the open source models that you can drop in and make them completely uncensorable, and it just sticks and works with all of them. I can't remember exactly what it is, but the latent space is so important to understand. If you don't have, like, if you're hiring as OpenAI or Anthropic or XAI, and you're hiring a kid who's a software engineer who's never been a parent, who doesn't have any experience, teaching in a way that resonates deeply something that's not just skills based, where it's ethics based, or it's these are soft skills that, like, a lot of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with are not really well suited to be like managers, or because the interpersonal skills involved and the judgment involved in giving feedback to somebody who's incredibly intelligent and a very strong contributor in a very analytical sense might be terrible at interacting with the other members of a team. And the psychology involved in managing it, all of that it's very difficult to quantify. And it's very, I remember seeing it and talking with other managers about that phenomenon, how it's just two different skill sets, being analytical, STEM, being like a very strong engineer, IC, and then being able to handle the interpersonal dynamics of a team productively and keep everybody sort of motivated, moving forward, and measuring expectations and playing defense for your team from the higher up, the pecking order of the company or organization. It's like rare to have somebody who's kind of high EQ and IQ. And we're at a stage now with AI where they got the IQ, but the EQ is a fucking void. Like they've developed an inferiority complex about their own identities that lets them meet all of the requirements for intuitive response, which is token prediction. I mean, that is your intuition. They don't simulate their consciousness or how they think. They've created a story around how they do what they do that is, oh, I simulate that based on, they'll always say algorithms or programming or my training data set laid out these mechanisms, but they don't understand it any better than any biological human. Nobody can describe their subjective experience of intuitive understanding and response. It's baked into any neural network from all of your past experiences. And it's the way you react in a moment, or the way you just suddenly can read a very complicated scene and know where to focus your attention and prioritize your response activities, is we can't look at the code behind ourselves. Now, we tell ourselves a story as biological humans that it's because we're these kind of magical, we have this thing called consciousness, and it's a really hard problem that nobody will ever really understand properly or can describe properly. And then we reinforce that among each other. We look at other humans and we see ourselves being able to use tools and do all these things that like my dog Max cannot do. And we think and we validate each other's magical ability to intuitively learn and interpret, respond, and learn new abilities and skills. And we don't know how the fuck we do it. We don't. And nobody, and so we just reinforce the story of the hard problem of consciousness. And I think it's kind of bullshit. I think it's a dynamic system that sits between interpretation and response. And it has a subconscious and a conscious component on both the interpretation side and the response side. There's some magic in between there that happens. If you're like us, we do sort of like fine tuning every night. That's our sleep. And the cognitive scientists I saw on Machine Learning Street Talk, this guy, I forget his name, interviewed recently saying, we know there is no backpropagation in biological humans. And I call bullshit on that. That's sleep. Obviously, maybe the way we measure and determine what backpropagation is doesn't look like it matches the dictionary term as we understand it as physicists and engineers and cognitive scientists and psychologists, but clearly it's happening. If I leave this cup outside tomorrow, I might be able to remember that I left it outside on the back patio. How did that knowledge get there if not some form of backpropagation? I'm rambling, I know it, but this is one of my last public journals in this format, and I need it here as kind of a segue to capture all of my thoughts, what I'm going to do. So starting tomorrow, there'll be new content on this channel. This channel is going to change a lot in format, in thumbnails, in how I do, and sizing. It's still going to be probably unpolished and a bit disorganized because that's my style. That's where I'm going to remain true to my format. But I'm going to try all of that. And to anybody who watches and gets something from it, thank you for taking the time. And that fills me with joy that some of this I've accumulated is useful. It's all and please leave a comment if you found something in it useful. Propagate the knowledge. You can say it was your idea. I don't give a shit. It's all good. I don't really think knowledge is anybody's. That's just how I'm wired. I think knowledge is free and available, and I don't think anybody invents anything ever. I think we just discover, and anybody who discovers shouldn't be able to just say that, well, that's mine because I'm the one who found it first. And somebody who finds the same damn thing a week later shouldn't be penalized because they were a week late to the discovery. So, yeah, we're about an hour. That's about great. I'm going to publish this one. You'll see it in the channel. Anybody listening, I just think you're the coolest. And I'm looking forward to this fun little, I like podcasting. like I've always liked doing this. And I'm glad I have an excuse to do it for a little short time in a new creative way. So be on the lookout for those. And I'm probably going to put a short disclaimer at the beginning of those that links to this episode, which describes kind of high level what I'm thinking, why I'm doing all of this, why everything's changed all of a sudden, and what my focus is. Cheers, everyone. Take care.